Commander Diana had seen a lot of ridiculous things in her 3 years as Earth's representative to the Galactic Council. She'd watched the Xentorians declare war over a disputed recipe for crystallized atmospheric moisture, which was basically space cotton candy. She'd mediated a trade dispute between the Karathi and Velans that lasted 6 months, because neither species could agree on the proper shade of purple for diplomatic sashes. She'd even sat through Ambassador Cleth's 4-hour presentation on the superior aesthetic properties of spherical architecture, which was just an elaborate way of saying his people lived in fancy bubbles. But this was a new level of absurd, even for the Council. "A pet showcase," Diana muttered, staring at the holographic invitation floating above her desk in the cramped quarters aboard Station Harmony. The message pulsed with cheerful, rainbow-colored text that made her eyes water. An interspecies pet showcase to demonstrate the universal bond between sentient beings and their beloved companion animals. She leaned back in her chair, which creaked ominously, another reminder that human engineering wasn't exactly the galactic standard. The invitation continued scrolling, filled with sickeningly sweet language about fostering understanding through the pure love shared between species and their cherished animal friends. There were even little animated hearts floating around the border. Hearts in a diplomatic communication. Diana rubbed her temples. Sometimes she missed the good old days when Earth's biggest problem was whether to nuke themselves into extinction or just poison the oceans. At least, those were straightforward issues. Her comm unit chimed, and the blue-skinned face of Ambassador Cleth appeared on her screen. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a Xentorian expression that Diana had learned meant either deep thought or severe constipation. With Cleth, it was usually the latter. "Greetings, Commander Diana," Cleth said, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension that made Diana want to introduce his face to her coffee mug. "I trust you received the Council's delightful invitation to our pet showcase." "Oh, yes," Diana replied, matching his fake enthusiasm with her own. "Delightful. Absolutely thrilling. I can barely contain my excitement." Cleth's main eyes narrowed, while his secondary ones continued blinking. "I do hope Earth will be able to participate meaningfully in this cultural exchange. I know your species has limited experience with proper animal companionship." There it was, the subtle dig. Cleth had been taking shots at humanity ever since Diana arrived, apparently operating under the assumption that humans were some sort of backwater species who barely qualified as sentient, which, to be fair, wasn't entirely inaccurate on some days. "Oh, we'll participate," Diana said, her smile sharp enough to cut through the station's reinforced hull. "Trust me, we have some very unique ideas about pets." After Cleth's smug face disappeared from her screen, Diana pulled up the cultural files on the other Council species. What she found confirmed her suspicions. Every single one of the 43 member species had evolved companion animals that looked like they'd been designed by a committee of kindergarteners with access to unlimited fluff and rainbow paint. The Xentorians kept creatures called fluffkins, literally balls of cotton with tiny black eyes that made musical chirping sounds. The files showed Ambassador Cleth's personal pet, a cream-colored puffball named Whispers, who apparently spent most of its time sitting on Cleth's shoulder, looking adorable. The Karathi had bonded with mouse-like creatures that sang in perfect harmony and changed colors based on their mood. Brix's pet, according to the files, was a little blue thing called Melody, who could supposedly sing lullabies in 18 different languages. The Velans kept what could only be described as flying hamsters with rainbow fur and gossamer wings. Delegate Yondu's companion, Sparkle, was featured in several promotional videos performing aerial acrobatics that looked like a cross between ballet and a fireworks display. Diana scrolled through page after page of creatures that belonged in a children's toy store rather than the real world. Everything was soft, colorful, harmless, and engineered to trigger every possible nurturing instinct in the universe. "Well," she said to the empty room, "this is going to be interesting." She opened a secure channel to Earth and waited for the connection to establish. General Martinez appeared on screen, looking tired and slightly annoyed, his default expression since taking over as liaison for off-world operations. "Diana," he said without preamble, "please tell me you're calling because the aliens have finally decided to share their faster-than-light technology." "Not quite, General. I need you to arrange transportation for 2 passengers from the Colorado facility." Martinez's eyebrows climbed toward his rapidly receding hairline. "Passengers? What kind of passengers?" Diana's grin was positively predatory. "The furry kind." "Oh no," Martinez said, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Diana, please tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking." "The Council wants to see our pets, General. They want to understand the bond between humans and their beloved animal companions." She emphasized the word beloved with just enough sarcasm to make her point clear. "There are regulations about transporting dangerous—" "They're not dangerous," Diana interrupted. "They're pets. Technically speaking, they're registered as emotional support animals. The paperwork is all filed properly." Martinez stared at her for a long moment. "How old are they now?" "6 months. Perfect age. Still cute enough to be endearing, but old enough to demonstrate proper socialization." "Diana, when the Council said, 'Bring your pets,' I'm pretty sure they meant something more along the lines of, I don't know, goldfish?" "That's the beauty of cultural exchange, General. They get to learn about human perspectives on animal companionship. We get to watch their faces when they realize that cute and cuddly means something very different on Earth." Martinez pinched the bridge of his nose. "The insurance premiums alone are Earth's problem, not mine. I'm just following diplomatic protocol. The Council specifically requested that each species bring examples of their most cherished animal companions. I'm bringing ours. Most species probably define cherished as unlikely to eat the other diplomats." Diana shrugged. "Cultural differences are what make the universe interesting, General. Besides, they're perfectly well behaved. Dr. Hendricks has been working with them since they were cubs, and they've passed every behavioral assessment with flying colors." "That's what worries me," Martinez muttered. "When animals pass human behavioral assessments, it usually means they've learned to be more efficient predators." "They're sweet, Martinez. They purr. They play with toys. They follow basic commands. They're just bigger than average. And equipped with claws that can shred steel plating." "Details," Diana waved dismissively. "Look, every other species is bringing some variation of an animated stuffed animal. The Zentaurians are bringing creatures that look like cotton balls with eyes. The Karathi have singing mice. These beings have never encountered anything more dangerous than a butterfly with an attitude problem." Martinez leaned forward on the screen. "Diana, level with me. What's your actual endgame here?" Diana's expression grew serious for the first time in the conversation. "The Council has been treating humanity like we're some sort of novelty act since we joined. We're the quaint primitives who barely qualified for membership. Cleth spends half his time making condescending comments about our crude understanding of interspecies relations. And you think bringing apex predators to a pet show is going to change that?" I think it's going to give them a very clear understanding of exactly what kind of species they're dealing with. We're not the harmless little mammals they think we are, Martinez. We didn't claw our way to the top of Earth's food chain by being cute and fluffy. Martinez was quiet for several seconds, and Diana could practically hear the gears turning in his head. Finally, he sighed. How much trouble are we talking about here? Minimal, if everyone stays calm and follows proper safety protocols. And if they don't? Diana's smile returned, sharp and predatory. Then they'll get a very educational demonstration of why humans are the only species in known space that actively seeks out dangerous animals to keep as companions. You realize this could cause a diplomatic incident? General, I've been sitting in council sessions for 3 years listening to 43 different species explain why their way of doing things is superior to everyone else's. Do you know what they all have in common? Enlighten me. They're boring. Every single one of them evolved on worlds where the biggest threat was bad weather or maybe a particularly aggressive plant. They've never had to deal with creatures that could hunt them for sport. They've never had to coexist with something that could kill them without breaking a sweat. Diana stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the sprawling structure of Station Harmony. Ships from dozens of species docked at various ports, their designs as diverse as their creators, but all sharing a certain softness. Everything was curved edges and gentle lines, built by species that had never needed to consider that their creations might need to withstand an attack. We're different, Martinez. We always have been, and maybe it's time the Council understood exactly what that means. Martinez's voice was carefully neutral when he responded. Transportation will be arranged. Dr. Hendricks will accompany them? Of course. Can't have unsupervised pets at a diplomatic function. Right. Pets. Martinez shook his head. Diana, for the record, when this goes sideways, and it will go sideways, I want it noted that I advised against this course of action. Noted and filed, General. Anything else? Yeah. Good luck. You're going to need it. After the call ended, Diana returned to her desk and began reviewing the pet showcase protocols. The event was scheduled for the main assembly hall, with each delegation presenting their companion animals to the full council. There would be demonstrations of the special bonds between species and their pets, opportunities for interaction between different animals, and, according to the itinerary, a delightful afternoon of cultural exchange through our beloved animal friends. Diana pulled up the technical specifications for the assembly hall's safety systems: force fields, emergency bulkheads, automated security protocols, standard diplomatic precautions designed to handle the occasional argument between delegates or maybe a malfunctioning piece of technology. She wondered if they were rated for the kind of excitement her pets might generate. Her comm unit chimed again, and this time Brix's scaled face appeared on the screen. The Karathi female's crest was flushed a pleased shade of pink, and her large eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. Diana! How wonderful to hear you'll be joining our showcase. Melody is so excited to meet Earth's companion animals. Tell me, what sort of creature will you be presenting? Oh, it's a surprise, Diana said, maintaining her poker face. I wouldn't want to spoil the cultural exchange by giving away too many details beforehand. How thoughtful. I do hope they'll get along well with the other pets. Melody is quite social, you know. She loves making new friends. Diana glanced at the photos on her desk, 2 amber eyes staring back at her from faces that would be adorable if you could ignore the very visible fangs. I'm sure they'll make quite an impression, she said. After Brix signed off, Diana leaned back in her chair and considered her options one final time. She could still call Martinez back, cancel the transport and show up with a nice, safe goldfish in a bowl. The council would probably appreciate the gesture, even if they'd never stop making jokes about humanity's simple pets. Or she could follow through with her plan and give the council a lesson in human nature that they'd never forget. Diana looked at the photos again. Crash and burn, named for their favorite activities and their unfortunate tendency to approach obstacles with maximum enthusiasm and minimal caution. 6 months old, which in their species meant they were roughly the size of large dogs with all the playful energy of puppies and none of the self-preservation instincts of their adult counterparts. They were also, according to every behavioral assessment, completely devoted to their human handlers and trained to respond to voice commands in 3 languages. "Cultural exchange," Diana murmured, pulling up the transportation request form. "They want to understand human-animal companionship? Let's show them what that really means." She began typing the official request, carefully using all the proper diplomatic language and bureaucratic terminology that would get her pets cleared for transport, without too many questions. After all, they were registered service animals, properly trained and certified for human interaction. The fact that they also happened to be apex predators was just an interesting footnote. Diana finished the paperwork and transmitted it to Earth, then sat back to wait for the fun to begin. In 48 hours, the Council would get a very educational lesson in the differences between species who evolved in gentle environments and species who had to fight for every meal. She was really looking forward to seeing their faces. The main assembly hall of Station Harmony had been transformed into something that looked like a cross between a diplomatic summit and the universe's most exclusive petting zoo. Holographic banners hung from the curved ceiling, displaying messages of peace and friendship in 43 different languages, while soft ambient lighting cast everything in a warm, welcoming glow that made Diana's teeth ache. She stood at the entrance, watching the controlled chaos unfold before her, and had to admit that the Council had outdone themselves in the presentation department. Elegant display areas had been set up throughout the hall, each one tailored to the specific environmental needs of different species' pets. The Zentorian section featured floating platforms covered in what looked like silk clouds, while the Karathi area included miniature concert stages complete with tiny spotlights. "Commander Diana!" The enthusiastic voice belonged to Delegate Yandu, who bounded over with the kind of energy that suggested his species had evolved from something resembling caffeinated squirrels. "How delightful to see you here! Where is your companion animal?" Diana glanced at the chronometer on her wrist. "They're being prepped for presentation. Should be arriving shortly." Yandu's large eyes, which took up about half his face and gave him a perpetually surprised expression, widened even further. "They? Oh, how wonderful! Multiple companions. We Velans understand the joy of bonded groups." He gestured toward his display area, where 3 rainbow-colored creatures were performing aerial maneuvers that defied several laws of physics. Sparkle, Shimmer, and Gleam have been together since hatching. They simply cannot bear to be separated. Diana watched the flying hamsters execute a synchronized loop-de-loop that would have impressed pilots at an air show. How energetic, indeed, and so protective of one another. Why, just last week, Sparkle defended Shimmer from a particularly aggressive flower in my garden. Such courage in such a tiny form. An aggressive flower. Diana filed that away under things that would never be a problem on Earth, and nodded politely. Impressive. Across the hall, Ambassador Cleth was holding court near the Zentorian display, his 4 eyes practically glowing with smug satisfaction as he addressed a small crowd of delegates. On his shoulder, Whispers, the cotton ball with eyes, was making soft musical sounds that Diana grudgingly admitted were actually quite pleasant. The bond between sentient beings and their companion animals represents the highest form of evolved empathy, Cleth was saying, his voice carrying that lecturing tone he usually reserved for explaining why Zentorian architecture was superior to everyone else's. It requires a sophisticated understanding of interspecies communication, emotional intelligence, and nurturing instincts that only the most advanced civilizations possess. Several delegates nodded along, their own pets nestled safely in their arms or perched on specially designed platforms. Diana counted at least 15 different species of creatures that all looked like they'd been designed by committee specifically to trigger protective instincts in anything with functioning neurons. Of course, Cleth continued, some species may find the complexities of proper animal companionship challenging. We must be patient with those whose evolutionary development has been more limited. His main eyes looked directly at Diana when he said it, and she felt her smile sharpen to something that could have cut diamond. "How thoughtful of you, Ambassador," she said, raising her voice just enough to be heard across the immediate area. "I'm sure everyone appreciates your patience with us lesser evolved species." Cleth's secondary eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of either confusion or mild alarm. "I merely meant that different species have different approaches to animal companionship." "Absolutely. For instance, I notice most of your companion animals seem designed primarily for aesthetic appeal and emotional comfort." Diana gestured around the hall at the various displays of fluff and rainbow colors. "Very safe choices." Brix approached from the Karathi section, her scaled crest flushed a curious shade of blue. "Safe? Is there another consideration for companion animals?" "Oh, you know," Diana said casually. "Practical applications. Protection, utility, that sort of thing. Some species prefer companions that can actually contribute to their survival if necessary." The growing crowd of delegates exchanged glances that ranged from confused to mildly concerned. Delegate Thane, the station's authority figure, stepped forward with the careful movements of someone trying to head off a potential diplomatic incident. "I'm sure all species have their own unique perspectives on animal companionship," Thane said in their carefully neutral voice. "The beauty of this showcase is the opportunity to learn from our differences." "Exactly," Diana agreed. "Cultural exchange at its finest." Her comm unit chirped softly, and she glanced down to see a message from Dr. Hendricks. "Transport complete. Subjects secured and ready for presentation. Recommend gradual introduction protocol." Diana's grin widened. "Well, it looks like Earth's contribution to the showcase has arrived. I should go prepare for our presentation." She started toward the human section of the hall, which had been set up with standard Earth-normal environmental controls and what the station crew had assumed would be adequate space for whatever small animal Earth might contribute. The display area included a small raised platform, comfortable seating for delegates, and safety barriers that would keep curious aliens from getting too close to whatever harmless creature humanity had brought. Diana looked at the barriers, designed to keep delegates away from something roughly the size of a house cat, and wondered if she should mention that they might want to reinforce those. Nah. Where was the fun in that? Behind her, she could hear the delegates resuming their conversations, but with a slightly different tone now. Her comments about protection and utility had clearly planted seeds of curiosity, if not outright concern. "Protection?" she heard Yondu asking Brix. "What could Sparkle possibly need to protect me from?" "Perhaps Earth has more Challenging wildlife? Bricks suggested. Their planet does have a reputation for being somewhat vigorous. Cleth's voice carried over the others, dripping with condescension. I'm sure whatever primitive creature the human has brought will be educational. We must remember that Earth is still adapting to civilized standards. Diana paused at the human section's entrance and looked back at the assembled delegates, all clustered around their adorable, harmless, completely defenseless pets. Whispers was still making his musical sounds. Melody was harmonizing beautifully from her perch. The flying hamsters were performing what appeared to be aerial choreography. It was like looking at a galactic daycare center. Her comm unit chirped again. Ready for transport to presentation area. Awaiting your authorization. Diana glanced around the hall one more time, taking in the soft lighting, the gentle ambient sounds, and the general atmosphere of peaceful, civilized discourse. Everyone looked so relaxed, so confident in their understanding of what constituted appropriate animal companionship. She opened the secure channel to Dr. Hendricks. Authorization confirmed. Begin transport protocol. Understood, Commander. Just to confirm, you want both subjects transported simultaneously? Diana watched Cleth gesture dismissively toward the human section while explaining something to a group of younger delegates who were hanging on his every word about the proper way to select companion animals. Both subjects, Doctor. Let's give them the full experience. Roger that. Transport initiating in 30 seconds. Diana moved to the center of the human display area and waited. Around her, the other delegates continued their conversations, occasionally glancing in her direction, with expressions ranging from curious to mildly pitying. She was clearly the entertainment for the evening. The backward human who didn't understand the sophisticated art of pet selection. The transport beam materialized in the center of the platform, and Diana heard Dr. Hendricks's voice over the comm. Transport complete. Good luck, Commander. For a moment, there was silence. The kind of perfect, crystalline silence that occurs just before something spectacular happens. Then the transport beam faded, revealing two medium-sized transport carriers with reinforced transparent aluminum sides and multiple warning labels in Earth languages. The carriers were quiet. Perfectly, ominously quiet. Every delegate in the hall had turned to look at the human section, their conversations dying as they waited to see what Earth had contributed to their adorable pet showcase. Even Cleth had stopped lecturing, his four eyes focused intently on the carriers. Diana stepped forward and placed her hands on the release mechanisms for both carriers simultaneously. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Galactic Council," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent hall, "I present Earth's contribution to the Interspecies Pet Showcase." She triggered both releases at the same time. For approximately 2 seconds, nothing happened. The carriers opened with soft hydraulic hisses, but their contents remained hidden in shadow. Then, 2 pairs of amber eyes appeared in the darkness, followed by the soft sound of padded feet on metal flooring. Crash emerged first, his orange and black striped coat gleaming under the hall's ambient lighting. He was exactly what Diana had promised. 6 months old, roughly the size of a large dog, and undeniably adorable in the way that only young predators could be. His ears twitched as he took in the new environment, and he made a soft chuffing sound that was probably meant to be friendly. Byrne followed immediately after, her slightly smaller frame moving with the liquid grace that her species was famous for. Her coat was a darker shade than her companions', with more pronounced black stripes, and her amber eyes held an intelligence that was both captivating and unsettling. The two cubs padded onto the platform and immediately began investigating their surroundings with the kind of focused attention that made Diana's heart swell with pride. They were beautiful, healthy, and displaying perfect socialization behaviors. They were also, quite obviously, apex predators. The silence in the hall stretched for what felt like an eternity. Diana could practically hear the collective mental recalibration happening as 43 different species simultaneously revised their assumptions about human pet preferences. Ambassador Cleth's 4 eyes were blinking in rapid sequence. Definitely panic this time, not constipation. "Those," Delegate Thane said very carefully, "are not what we expected." Diana beamed at the assembled crowd. "Meet Crash and Burn. Aren't they precious?" Crash chose that moment to yawn, displaying a set of teeth that were designed by evolution to slice through things significantly more durable than cotton balls with eyes. The sound of 43 different species taking simultaneous steps backward was actually quite impressive. The collective intake of breath from 43 different species created a sound like air being sucked out of an airlock. Diana watched with professional satisfaction as every delegate in the hall suddenly discovered an urgent need to put more distance between themselves and the human display area. Crash, oblivious to the minor diplomatic crisis his presence had created, padded to the edge of the platform and sat down with the kind of casual grace that made his species legendary. His tail twitched once, twice, then settled into a lazy rhythm as he surveyed the assembly hall with the same interest a food critic might show when examining a particularly intriguing menu. "Commander Diana," Thane's voice was carefully controlled, the kind of tone usually reserved for diffusing explosive devices. "Perhaps you could explain the nature of your companion animals?" "Of course!" Diana's enthusiasm was positively radiant. "These are Siberian tigers, specifically Panthera tigris alteca. Crash here is male, about 6 months old, currently weighing in at roughly 90 pounds. Burn is female, slightly smaller, maybe 85 pounds. They're both from the Colorado Conservation Center, fully socialized and certified for human interaction." The silence that followed was so complete that Diana could hear the soft humming of the station's life support systems. Burn chose that moment to stand up, stretch in the boneless way that only cats could manage, and emit a sound that was part purr, part rumble, and entirely designed by millions of years of evolution to trigger the flight response in anything with functioning survival instincts. Ambassador Cleth's cotton ball pet, Whispers, stopped making musical sounds and began making what could only be described as distress squeaks. The little creature burrowed deeper into Cleth's shoulder padding, apparently trying to achieve invisibility through sheer force of will. "Those," Cleth said, his voice climbing toward a register that shouldn't have been possible for a being his size, "are predators." "Well, yes," Diana agreed cheerfully. "Apex predators, actually. Top of the food chain on Earth. Magnificent hunters, incredibly intelligent, and absolutely devoted to their human companions." She reached into her pocket and produced 2 objects that made every alien in the hall take another step backward. What appeared to be synthetic prey items designed to encourage natural hunting behaviors. Who wants to see how they play? "No!" The word came from approximately 20 different delegates simultaneously, in at least 15 different languages. Diana paused, toy in hand, with an expression of innocent confusion. "No. But playtime is important for proper socialization. Dr. Hendricks specifically recommended interactive engagement to demonstrate the bond between—" "Commander," Delegate Yondu interrupted, his voice pitched somewhere between terror and fascination. "When you say apex predators, exactly how apex Are we discussing? Diana considered the question with academic seriousness. Well, in their natural habitat, adult members of their species are capable of taking down prey animals weighing up to 800 pounds. They're excellent swimmers, can leap horizontally up to 33 feet, and have bite pressure of approximately 1,000 pounds per square inch. She gestured fondly at the cubs, who were now investigating the safety barriers with professional interest. Of course, Crash and Burn are still babies. They're only capable of bringing down prey about half their size at this point. The mathematical implications of that statement rippled through the assembled crowd like a shockwave. Diana could practically see the mental calculations. Cubs that weighed 90 pounds, capable of hunting prey half their size, which meant Brix's crest had faded to a sickly gray color. Prey, half their size? Around 40 to 45 pounds, yes, Diana confirmed helpfully, though they prefer their meals a bit smaller. More manageable, you know. Every delegate in the hall simultaneously looked down at their own pets, most of which fell well within that weight range. Melody, Brix's singing mouse creature, had stopped harmonizing and was now making sounds that could only be described as whimpering. The rainbow hamsters had ceased their aerial acrobatics and were huddled together on their platform, apparently hoping that staying very, very still might help them avoid notice. But they're perfectly safe, Diana continued, her tone suggesting that anyone who thought otherwise was being unreasonably paranoid. They've been extensively trained in appropriate social behaviors. As if to demonstrate, Crash looked up at the sound of his name and padded over to where Diana stood. He sat politely at her feet, amber eyes bright with affection, and made a soft, chuffing sound that was probably meant to be reassuring. The effect was somewhat undermined by the fact that, even sitting, his head came up to Diana's waist, and his shoulders suggested the kind of muscle mass that could probably punch through the station's hull plating. See? Diana reached down to scratch behind Crash's ears, a gesture that provoked an alarmed intake of breath from the watching delegates. Gentle as lambs. Crash leaned into the attention, eyes half closing in contentment, and began to purr. The sound started as a low rumble, but quickly escalated into something that seemed to emanate from his entire body. A deep, thrumming vibration that made the deck plates under their feet buzz sympathetically. "That sound, Doctor," Neck said faintly. "What is that sound?" "Purring," Diana explained. "It indicates contentment and affection. Completely normal behavior. What she didn't mention was that the purr of a 6-month-old tiger cub was roughly equivalent to standing next to industrial machinery." The sound filled the assembly hall, drowning out the ambient noise and making conversation difficult. Burn, apparently deciding that Crash was getting too much attention, padded over to join them. She bumped her head against Diana's free hand in a gesture that would have been adorable if it hadn't involved approximately 85 pounds of predator-demanding affection. The two cubs flanked Diana, purring in harmony, their combined vocalizations turning the peaceful assembly hall into something that sounded suspiciously like the engine room of a battleship. "They seem attached to you," Thane observed, shouting slightly to be heard over the purring. "Oh yes," Diana called back. "Tigers are incredibly social with their chosen family groups. Very protective, very loyal. They'd do anything to keep their humans safe." The cubs chose that moment to demonstrate their protective instincts. Something, probably the combination of raised voices, nervous movements, and the general atmosphere of barely controlled panic, triggered their natural guarding behaviors. Both cubs stopped purring simultaneously and turned to face the crowd of delegates, their posture shifting from relaxed contentment to alert attention. Their ears came forward, Their eyes sharpened, and suddenly the assembly hall felt very, very small. "Nobody move," Diana said quietly, though her voice carried clearly in the sudden silence. "They're just being protective, completely normal behavior." The standoff lasted approximately 15 seconds, which was 14 seconds longer than anyone in the assembly hall had expected to survive. 43 different species held their collective breath, while 2 tiger cubs evaluated the threat level of a room full of diplomats who were trying very hard to look non-threatening. Then something unexpected happened. Pip, the young Karathi delegate, who couldn't have been more than the equivalent of a human teenager, made a soft sound of distress. She'd been standing near the back of the crowd, trying to get a better view of the proceedings, when the sudden shift in atmosphere had trapped her between a support pillar and a group of much larger delegates. The sound was quiet, barely a whisper in the larger scheme of things, but Byrne's ears immediately swiveled toward it with laser precision. What happened next would become the stuff of diplomatic legend. Instead of interpreting the sound as a threat, Byrne tilted her head in the universal expression of concerned curiosity. She looked at Diana, made a soft, questioning chirp, then carefully, very, very carefully, padded toward the young Karathi. "Byrne, no," Diana said, but without the sharp command tone that would have stopped the cub immediately. She was curious to see what would happen. The crowd parted like water before the approaching tiger, delegates scrambling to get out of the way while trying not to make any sudden movements. Byrne ignored them completely. Her attention focused entirely on Pip, who had pressed herself against the support pillar with the wide-eyed expression of someone who had just realized that her life had taken a very unexpected turn. Byrne approached slowly, her body language shifting from alert protectiveness to something that Diana recognized but doubted anyone else in the room would: maternal concern. The cub stopped about 3 feet away from Pip and sat down, deliberately making herself smaller and less threatening. Then she made a sound that Diana had only heard a few times before, a soft, questioning mew that was the tiger equivalent of, "Are you okay?" Pip stared at the tiger for a long moment, her scaled crest cycling through colors that probably indicated everything from terror to fascination. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Hello." Byrne responded by lowering herself into a play bow, front end down, rear end up, tail swishing gently, and made another soft mew. "She wants to play," Diana called out, though she kept her voice calm and non-threatening. "It's a friendly gesture." Pip looked from Byrne to Diana and back again. Very slowly, she extended one scaled hand toward the tiger cub. The entire assembly hall held its breath. Byrne sniffed delicately at Pip's fingers, then gently bumped her head against the young delegate's palm in the same affectionate gesture she'd used with Diana earlier. The purring started again, but softer this time, a low, comforting rumble rather than the industrial strength vibration from before. Pip's eyes widened in wonder, and her crest flushed a brilliant shade of gold that Diana suspected meant joy or amazement. "She's warm," Pip whispered, her voice filled with awe. "And so soft." Ambassador Cleth, who had been standing frozen with his cotton ball pet still cowering on his shoulder, finally found his voice. "This is unprecedented." "Actually," Diana said, walking over to where Pip was now gently scratching behind Byrne's ears while the cub purred contentedly, "this is perfectly normal tiger behavior. They're incredibly social animals, and they have excellent instincts for reading emotional states." She gestured to Crash, who had remained on the platform but was watching the interaction with obvious approval. "They can tell the difference between a genuine threat and someone who's just scared or curious. Pip wasn't threatening anyone. She was just overwhelmed. Byrne recognized that and responded appropriately. Dr. Nex, the xenobiologist, stepped forward with the cautious movements of someone approaching a fascinating but potentially dangerous specimen. The behavioral complexity is remarkable. These creatures can make those kinds of social distinctions. Tigers are among the most intelligent predators on Earth, Diana explained, though she kept one eye on both cubs to make sure they remained calm. They have to be. Survival in their natural environment requires sophisticated understanding of social dynamics, threat assessment, and resource management. Brix, her crest now a curious shade of blue-green, moved closer to get a better look. But surely such dangerous animals cannot be trusted around. The risk factors alone are manageable if you understand their nature, Diana finished. Yes, they're predators. Yes, they're dangerous if threatened or provoked. But they're also capable of incredible loyalty, affection, and protective instincts toward their chosen family groups. She moved to stand next to Pip, who was now sitting cross-legged on the floor while Byrne sprawled contentedly beside her, apparently having decided that the young Karathi was now part of her pack. The difference between human and alien perspectives on animal companionship, Diana continued, isn't about intelligence or evolutionary development. It's about risk tolerance and mutual benefit. Ambassador Cleth's secondary eyes were blinking rapidly as he processed this information. Mutual benefit? Most of your species chose companion animals that provide emotional comfort with minimal risk, Diana explained. Humans chose companion animals that provide emotional comfort and practical benefits, like protection, hunting assistance, and threat deterrence. Crash chose that moment to demonstrate by padding over to investigate a small maintenance drone that had entered the hall through an access port. The cub sniffed at the device, determined it wasn't a threat, and promptly ignored it. But his mere presence had been enough to make the automated system retreat back through its access port. "They're living security systems," Delegate Yandu said, with dawning understanding. "Emotional companions that also serve protective functions." Exactly. And because they're intelligent enough to make complex social distinctions, they can be both deadly guardians and gentle friends. Diana reached down to scratch Crash's ears as he returned to the group. It's not about being primitive or advanced. It's about different survival strategies. Thane, who had been observing the entire interaction with professional interest, stepped forward. This raises interesting questions about our understanding of interspecies relationships. We may need to revise our guidelines for companion animal classifications. Enhanced pet categories? Diana suggested helpfully. For species that prefer companions with more diverse skill sets. Cleth, who had remained silent during most of this exchange, finally spoke up. His voice had lost much of its earlier condescension. "I must admit, the behavioral complexity and social intelligence of your pets is impressive, though I still question the wisdom of maintaining relationships with creatures capable of such violence." Byrne, as if summoned by the comment, lifted her head from where she'd been dozing against Pip's leg and fixed Cleth with a steady amber stare. She didn't move, didn't make any threatening gestures, but the message was clear. She was aware of him, evaluating him, and perfectly capable of action if necessary. Cleth's cotton ball pet made a soft squeaking sound and burrowed deeper into his shoulder padding. "Violence is a tool," Diana said quietly, "like intelligence or social skills or any other capability. What matters is how it's used and why." She looked around the assembly hall, meeting the eyes of delegates who were seeing humans and their pets in an entirely new light. We didn't bring Crash and Burn here to threaten anyone or cause chaos. We brought them to show you what human-animal companionship actually looks like. It's not about dominance or danger. It's about partnership between species that respect each other's capabilities. Pip, who had been listening to the entire exchange while continuing to pet Burn, looked up with bright, curious eyes. Could I visit them again sometime? I'd like to learn more about Earth animals. Diana's smile was genuine and warm for the first time since the whole affair had begun. I think that could be arranged. As the assembly hall slowly returned to something resembling normal diplomatic function, though with significantly more respectful distance being maintained around the human section, Diana settled into a chair to begin writing her report. Crash curled up at her feet, like the world's most dangerous ottoman, while Burn remained with Pip, apparently having adopted the young Karathi as her personal responsibility. "Mission accomplished," Diana murmured, typing her initial observations. "Cultural exchange successful. New protocols established for enhanced pet categories. No diplomatic incidents requiring medical attention." She paused and looked at the two cubs, who were now demonstrating the same peaceful coexistence with alien species that their human handler had been trying to achieve for 3 years. Sometimes the best diplomacy involved showing rather than telling. And sometimes the most dangerous creatures made the best ambassadors for understanding the true nature of strength, tempered by wisdom. Diana returned to her report, already planning the follow-up cultural exchange programs that would help the Council understand that humans, like their pets, were far more complex than surface appearances might suggest.